Welcome to What They Really Said. We are diving into a truly fascinating set of sources today.
We really are.
It's the transcript of a high-level, really in-depth conversation with former Microsoft CEO and, well, full-time philanthropist Bill Gates.
Right.
And this is a deep dive into a mind that is currently making these huge, high-stakes decisions across global health, climate innovation, and economic disruption.
It's a massive scope. And what's so compelling about this material, I think, is that Gates isn't sitting in some, academic ivory tower.
Not at all.
He's talking about choices he actually has to make as the largest private funder in global health, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation.
All three.
All three. And that gives his perspective on real-world trade-offs. I mean, there's zero-sum choices that happen when government budgets contract. It just gives it an invaluable weight.
Absolutely. The breadth of the discussion is almost jarring. It covers everything from the sobering realities of global health funding reversals, which literally mean more children dying, to the massive disruptive power of artificial intelligence and how politics shapes the most important humanitarian work in the world.
And so our mission for you, the listener, is to try and extract the core insights and, the surprising connections from this really complex conversation.
Right.
We are looking far beyond the headlines to understand the why behind the financial setbacks and, critically, the strategic use of innovation to try and counteract these painful political realities.
And we have to start with the immediate shock.
We do.
The conversation kicks off with the lead finding from the Gates Foundation's annual Goalkeepers Report, and it delivers a highly sobering headline. I mean, it's a real punch to the gut for anyone tracking global progress over the last 2 decades.
Okay, so let's unpack this sobering reality. The core finding is genuinely jarring. It challenges everything we thought we knew about the trajectory of global health improvement.
It really does.
The report projects that 2025 will be the first year this century where preventable child deaths are expected to rise.
The first time this century. Just think about that for a moment. 25 years of consistent, massive, historic progress just halted and reversed.
And that unprecedented setback is so shocking because of the historical context. I mean, when the Gates Foundation was launched around the year 2000, it was partly because they were horrified by the fact that 10 million children were dying every single year.
10 million.
From entirely preventable causes. They were dying from things like diarrhea, pneumonia, and, vaccine-preventable diseases.
Things we solved 100 years ago in the West.
Exactly. And since then, the global health movement, fueled by focused funding and innovation, achieved what Gates himself calls a miracle.
A miracle that, until recently, was one of the greatest humanitarian success stories of the modern era. We went from 10 million annual deaths down to about 5 million.
Cut in half.
Cut in half. And that success was largely due to increased global resources dedicated to vaccines and treatments for those common killers. So to see a reversal after that historic achievement, it suggests something fundamental has changed in the political calculus of wealthy nations.
And we have hard, concrete data confirming this reversal. The report states that in 2024, 4.6 million children died before their 5th birthday.
Okay.
The projection for 2025 shows that number rising by over 200,000 to an estimated 4.8 million children.
200,000 more.
And this isn't a statistical blip or, a random fluctuation. The source material attributes this increase directly to conscious policy choices.
So Gates is very clear on the causality here.
Oh, absolutely.
For 25 years, we increased the money and deaths went down. Now, we are decreasing the money, and it is a painful but perhaps predictable reality that more deaths are resulting.
There's a direct line.
A direct line from a budget cut to a child's life.
And what's crucial to understand is where the financial pressure points are. The source material names the specific wealthy countries making these cuts.
Right.
The U.S., the U.K., and Germany. Gates describes this as an overall effect that is making the next 5 years a very, very difficult time period for global health. It's a systemic contraction.
And that pain, that cost in human life, it's not distributed evenly. Where are these cuts hitting the hardest? Because obviously, the wealthiest nations aren't seeing 200,000 more child deaths.
No. They are hitting the very poorest countries, those still caught in the deepest depths of the poverty trap.
The poverty trap.
And when we talk about the poverty trap, we mean places where low income prevents investment in health, which limits labor productivity, which keeps income low. It's just a vicious circle.
Right.
And the source material gives a harrowing example that just crystallizes this disparity. In northern Nigeria, Over 10% of children die before the age of 5.
10%, 1 in 10.
1 in 10 children. Now, compare that to the U.S., where that number is well below 1%, often related to complex birth complications. For us, child death is rare. For them, it's tragically common, and aid is the only margin they have.
And here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you contextualize that data point of the 200,000 net increase, Gates notes that this net increase in deaths would actually be much higher if it weren't for the success stories of countries that have moved beyond aid dependency.
Precisely. He points to the counterexample of India.
Okay.
Countries that have graduated from aid. That is, they now have the fiscal capacity and infrastructure to run their own vaccination and health programs like India. They continue to reduce deaths at a fantastic track record.
So they're self-sufficient now.
They're self-sufficient in this area.
Yeah.
And this means the aid effect, the difference that foreign assistance makes, is actually much greater than the net 200,000 increase.
Because the countries that are off aid are still doing well.
They're still doing well. So the cuts are exclusively affecting that tiny slice of the global population that cannot sustain these programs on its own.
So they are completely dependent on the generosity of wealthy nations for this life-saving margin. And this brings us squarely into the political dimension of aid, which is highly contentious, particularly in the U.S.
Yeah. We hear a lot of political rhetoric suggesting that foreign aid is wasted money and that cutting it is necessary budget tightening. And Gates addresses this dynamic head-on. He recounts his discussions with figures like former President Trump and Secretary Rubio.
Right.
And he expresses hope that they genuinely care about these issues and will ensure the U.S. gets back very close to the level of generosity that existed before 2025. He says he's optimistic that they don't want the U.S. to be held responsible for what he calls these large death increases.
It sounds like a highly personal and strategic lobbying effort. Is this hope tempered by the acknowledgement that these budgets are notoriously volatile?
It is. The hope is based on personal assurances, but the budget reality check is always there. He stresses that the next 6 months are critical for determining the future compacts with poor countries.
Okay.
But one of the most critical takeaways from his discussion is correcting a massive fundamental public misconception about the cost of this aid in the first place.
That one statistic is just key to the entire debate.
It is.
Gates stresses that U.S. global health aid is less than 1% of the total budget.
Less than 1%. That's a huge point that completely reframes the political debate.
Yeah.
He notes that if you ask the public what percentage of the budget goes to foreign aid, they often guess 5, 10, or even higher.
Right. They think it's a massive drain on resourcing.
A huge drain. But the reality is that U.S. global health aid has never even reached 1% of the budget. The last big push that brought it close was under President Bush, specifically for the PEPFAR program focusing on HIV/AIDS funding in Africa.
So if we were to contextualize that less than 1% figure, what does that really represent? Is it like half a penny on the dollar?
Essentially, yes. It's a rounding error compared to overall spending.
Yeah.
I mean, to give you context, the entire U.S. global health budget is often less than what one major defense contractor spends in a single year on R&D, or less than the annual operating budget of a large state university system. So allowing people to die when the medicines and vaccines are so inexpensive and the cost is so minimal relative to the overall budget, it just does not, in Gates's view, align with the moral framework of the world's wealthiest nations.
And this political commitment from the U.S., or the lack of it, also has a ripple effect globally. How do European partners react when the U.S. contracts its aid?
The U.S. commitment influences everyone. European countries are currently facing intense budget pressures of their own.
Right.
They have aging societies, which means high internal health care and pension costs.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're facing pressure to increase defense budgets due to geopolitical instability.
Which means they look to the U.S. for leadership. If the U.S. pulls back, Europe follows suit.
That's the dynamic. Gates mentions that the U.S. maintained its commitment to the Global Fund, a crucial entity that fights HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. He calls that a positive data point.
So a small win in a tough environment.
A small but critical win. He used that commitment as leverage when talking to European partners, saying, this is a 1-for-2 match construct, so please don't cut this.
What does that mean, a 1-for-2 match?
It means if the U.S. commits $1, Europe commits $2. So if the U.S. had cut its funding, the effect would have been catastrophic, 3 times the cut.
So even in a politically difficult climate, maintaining a commitment to the Global Fund acted as a kind of political firewall that helped mitigate some of the European cuts to other critical organizations like Gavi.
Exactly. It shows that maintaining a small budget line, even less than 1% of the total, has this outsized diplomatic and financial ripple effect globally, specifically in preventing the catastrophic outcomes we are now seeing projected for 2025.
And that context leads us directly to the specific tools under threat. The Goalkeepers report hammers home the point that vaccines remain the most impactful tool for global health improvement.
They are the biggest driver of that miracle we saw over the last 25 years.
The miracle worker, yes. But despite their incredible efficacy and low cost per life saved, the funding climate for vaccines is worsening faster than almost any other sector.
It is, and this is immediately visible in Gavi's fundraising performance.
And before we dive into the numbers, we should probably pause and define Gavi for those who might not be familiar with this critical organization.
Sure. Gavi stands for the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. It's one of the most successful public-private partnerships in global health history. Its core function is pooled procurement.
Pooled procurement.
It buys vaccines in huge quantities, which drives the price down dramatically, and then ensures those vaccines reach the poorest countries that couldn't afford them otherwise. It's basically the logistics and financial engine for vaccine equity.
And that engine is sputtering. The source material indicates that Gavi raised 25% less money in June in Brussels than it did 5 years prior.
25% less.
A 25% cut to the organization specifically designed to distribute life-saving preventative medicine globally that's severe.
It has severe, immediate consequences because a large part of Gavi's funding is used to introduce new innovations.
Right, not just the old stuff.
No. And the report gives the example of the RSV vaccine. Respiratory syncytial virus is a massive killer of infants globally. This new vaccine, which could save countless lives, simply won't be introduced in as many countries as needed because the money just isn't there.
So that's a direct, measurable connection between a dollar cut and a life lost due to a missed innovation opportunity.
A straight line.
Now, connecting this funding shortfall to the wider cultural issue, we have to look at vaccine skepticism, which is arguably higher than ever globally.
It's a huge factor.
And Gates provides a really insightful breakdown distinguishing vaccine reluctance in rich countries versus poor countries. He suggests they are two fundamentally different problems driven by vastly different realities.
This distinction is crucial for understanding public health messaging. In rich countries, because infectious diseases like measles are usually not present, or at least they're extremely rare, societies can afford to be pretty lax, as he puts it.
Complacent.
Very complacent. People forget the severity of the disease because the negative effects of skipping vaccination are often delayed or just not visible in their community. The absence of the disease breeds complacency.
And the statistics are just horrifyingly clear on this distinction between the two worlds. In the U.S., or a typical wealthy nation, about 5 kids might die for every 1,000 who contract measles. It's tragic, of course, but rare enough that the population forgets the threat.
However, the situation is grim and immediate in poor countries. The kids are often malnourished, which compromises their immune systems, and the healthcare infrastructure is minimal.
So they're already vulnerable.
Exactly. And in Africa, that ratio flips dramatically. Around 200 kids will die per 1,000 who get measles.
200.
That's a 40-fold increase in mortality risk. The danger is immediate, and it is tangible.
So in those communities, the miracle of the vaccine is still part of living memory. I think the source mentions the example of Samoa.
Yes. When Samoa temporarily stopped measles vaccination, they immediately saw many deaths, and that served as a harsh, immediate reminder of why that context matters. When watching a baby die from measles is a common occurrence, the effectiveness of the vaccine is undeniable.
In wealthy nations, that visceral experience is it's long gone for most people.
Long gone.
But this skepticism has now bled directly into government policy in the U.S., with figures like HHS Secretary RFK Jr., a known vaccine skeptic, holding high office and injecting their views into government dialogue, even changing information on websites like the CDC.
Right.
This must be a major source of tension for the foundation's work in the U.S.
It creates an enormous institutional tension, and Gates describes his highly pragmatic approach to dealing with the secretary.
Pragmatic how?
They quickly established that vaccines were an area where they would not find common ground or compromise. It was a philosophical chasm.
So they chose strategic avoidance. Rather than engaging in an unwinnable, time-consuming philosophical debate about the safety of standard childhood immunizations, they focused on areas where they could be productive.
Exactly. They partnered on research and work inside HHS and NIH, agreeing simply to, in his words, not touching that specific disagreement about vaccine efficacy.
A very results-oriented approach.
A very pragmatic, results-oriented approach to navigating a difficult political relationship. Prioritize the few areas of mutual interest, like research and innovation, to ensure momentum isn't entirely lost.
And that kind of polarization has also made Gates himself a target. The boogeyman narrative, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, has fueled these wild conspiracy theories that claim his work is nefarious. He addresses this strain directly in the conversation.
The irony here is just incredibly thick. The Gates Foundation was pivotal in funding the capacity for COVID testing swabs and accelerating vaccine development. They were trying to solve the problem as quickly as humanly possible.
They were on the front lines.
Right. The idea that this very high-impact, life-saving work was somehow used to track people or implant microchips is described by Gates as almost ironic, because the actual goal was the exact opposite: saving lives and ending the disruption.
He provides a direct, almost surgical counter to the claims made by some critics, specifically quoting a book that claims he kills millions of children and makes billions of dollars on vaccines. That claim is widely circulated in anti-vax communities.
And his correction is immediate and memorable, and I think it summarizes his position perfectly. He corrects us by stating, "It's close to correct I spend billions of dollars to save millions."
Wow.
He pleads guilty to being involved in the miracle of vaccines. By inverting the motive while confirming the underlying financial commitment, he dismisses the conspiracy theory as just absurd, based on a total misunderstanding of philanthropy.
That's a highly effective soundbite. But does the source material suggest he finds ways to meaningfully engage with the underlying distrust that fuels those conspiracies, or is this simply a successful media soundbite?
That's a critical question.
Because deflection doesn't necessarily solve the core problem of distrust, right?
No, it doesn't. And his engagement seems highly focused on the absurd manifestation of the distrust, rather than solving the systemic problem of polarization. He recounts a vivid anecdote of a woman yelling at him on the street, claiming he was tracking her location.
That must take incredible composure. Being able to deflect deep-seated, often irrational public anger while still being the face of massive global initiatives. Does the source material give any insight into the emotional toll of leading from that position?
The insight we get is through his dry humor. His response to the woman was, "I said, why did you go where you went?" It highlights the sheer absurdity of the accusations he now faces. He seems to handle it by focusing rigidly on the technical and measurable outcome of the work the millions saved, as a counterbalance to the irrational noise. He maintains his job is not to win a popularity contest, but to promote the greatest medical innovations of the last 2 decades.
So, moving from the turbulence of the vaccine debate and the shrinking budget environment, we find one unique area of strong bipartisan consensus and high commitment that seems to rise above the current political fray.
Polio eradication.
Polio eradication.
It is truly fascinating because the political environment is so contentious everywhere else, yet polio seems to be universally recognized as a humanitarian cause worth finishing.
Right.
Gates expresses significant confidence that the U.S. will not only maintain but possibly increase its funding for this specific effort.
So why does polio hold this unique status as a protected budget line item when, as we just discussed, the UK, Germany, and the U.S. are cutting funds for organizations like Gavi?
I think polio eradication is viewed as a legacy item. It's a clear finish line to a historic global campaign. It requires specific measurable actions to get the number of cases down from low thousands to zero.
A tangible win.
A tangible win. The U.S. contribution is substantial, approximately $210 million, which Gates admits they are trying to raise slightly. And it's supported not just by the U.S. government, but also by committed partners like Rotary International, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia.
So it has a stable, global, and politically diverse funding base.
Exactly. It's a collective political win just waiting to happen.
The source material recounts a detailed and surprising level of engagement former President Trump on the issue. This isn't just a political signature. It seems like a deep personal interest.
Gates notes that Trump is of a generation that remembers polio intimately. He grew up seeing the iron lung, seeing the debilitating effects of the disease in his own lifetime.
Right.
That personal experience gives him a deeper, visceral understanding of the disease's history and gravity that a younger politician might lack.
And this translated into highly specific, results-oriented action, which is a key insight into Trump's operational style. Gates says Trump is driven by the goal to be in charge when this is brought to an end.
It shows a profound desire for a legacy achievement that is profoundly humanitarian and globally recognized.
The finish line again?
It's about the finish line. And this commitment translated into direct, hands-on action. Gates recounts an incredible anecdote. Trump actively brought Gates into a phone conversation with Pakistan's field marshal to prioritize security work for vaccinators.
Wow, so he got directly involved in the logistics.
Directly. That level of presidential involvement, an immediate, practical application of geopolitical power to solve a deeply local logistical problem, is incredibly rare.
So what was the focus of that conversation?
The focus was purely on what was needed on the ground, ensuring the Army provided adequate escort and protection, prioritizing the NGO work, and solving the logistics for the vaccination teams who are facing constant security threats.
Because the issue isn't the vaccine itself.
No, it's getting the vaccine delivered in the face of violent opposition.
And the final hurdles are not medical. They are entirely logistical and security-focused. The source material pinpoints the precise, tiny location of this final frontier.
That location is a specific region in South Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan.
Okay.
This is the only small area in the entire world that has never gotten to 0 cases. The opposition from certain groups is fierce, leading to constant attacks on health workers.
So security is everything.
Everything. Because of the extreme security concerns, the Army has to escort the vaccinators every single day. Pakistan and Afghanistan remain the only 2 endemic countries left.
The mission is so tangible and measurable, they need to vaccinate 400,000 kids in that specific area to definitively break the chain of transmission.
Right. And given the high-level engagement and the stability of funding, Gates is very excited of the possibility of achieving 0 cases, potentially within the next few years.
So polio is the blueprint then?
It's the perfect example of how stable, committed funding, backed by high-level political will and focused, applied delivery, can achieve true global good, even when the surrounding political climate is volatile.
But what happens when the funding is not stable, which is the general reality?
Well, that brings us to Gates's framework for dealing with tight budgets globally. Doing more with less, through innovation.
Since the overall budget environment is shrinking, the only way to maintain or increase impact is by maximizing efficiency through innovation. Gates details how the foundation is structured for this.
Right.
Its money is split, half going to new innovations and half going to delivery in the field, the essential, boots-on-the-ground work, like distributing bed nets, vitamins, and maternal care.
And that structural split means they're constantly looking for ways to use cutting-edge technology to amplify the impact of every delivery dollar. And Gates is very bullish on one particular innovation.
I think I know where this is going.
He sees it as a revolutionary key to overcoming the funding shortfall. Artificial intelligence.
AI.
He sees AI not just as a tool for new discoveries, but as a powerful, immediate driver of global equity.
That is a radical concept. We usually associate AI with sophisticated, expensive Silicon Valley research labs. How can it solve the equity gap in places like Kenya or northern Nigeria?
It solves for the skill gap. Consider the health example. In wealthy countries, you need a highly trained, expensive technician and an expensive ultrasound machine to perform a reliable prenatal scan.
Right.
In many rural areas of the developing world, those technicians simply don't exist.
So AI steps into that gap.
It does.
Yeah.
Now, low-cost ultrasound devices can be operated by relatively untrained community health workers. The innovation is that the AI software interprets the data in real time. It processes the complex image and tells the pregnant woman, your delivery is going to be complicated. You need to travel 200 kilometers to a hospital that can perform an emergency C-section.
So it's already saving lives by democratizing expert knowledge and bridging this massive healthcare disparity overnight.
It turns a low-skill, high-risk situation into a guided, informed one, providing the same diagnostic quality you might get in a high-tech hospital in London.
Incredible.
And the application extends far beyond health. Gates wants to ensure African farmers who are operating subsistence farms, often without reliable weather data or specific knowledge about soil depletion, have as much data and agricultural advice as a rich farmer in Iowa does. This is a crucial application of AI to address economic equity at the ground level.
And here's where the innovation focus truly becomes bespoke and addresses a foundational barrier: language.
A huge barrier.
Traditional tech requires literacy and often English or other major global languages.
That's right. The AI models are being specifically trained not just on English, but on African native languages to provide virtual medical and agricultural advice.
Wow.
This breaks down the language gap, a massive systemic barrier that traditional data systems have always struggled with. By providing customized, culturally relevant advice instantly, AI becomes a multiplier for the existing, thinly stretched human aid resources.
So the opportunity, Gates concludes, to drive equity both in the discovery of new solutions and the delivery of those solutions is profound. This is his central thesis for overcoming the funding shortfall.
When you can't increase the budget, you must increase the effectiveness of the money you have through technology.
Which brings us to the sharp end of resource allocation and efficiency. The controversy around Gates's memo on climate funding.
The big one.
The climate memo caused significant controversy because Gates was perceived as dismissing certain climate initiatives, calling for focused resources, and rejecting what he called doomsday outlooks.
He got a lot of heat for that.
He was essentially creating a choice, a trade-off, where many climate advocates argue one shouldn't exist.
And the core controversy was that he was perceived as creating a false dichotomy between saving current lives and protecting future generations.
Right.
Gates's argument is straightforward and rooted in the reality of his position as the largest funder across three massive overlapping areas: global health, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation.
And he makes the critical observation that the political reality is that climate funding and vaccine funding often come from the same budget.
The same pool of finite discretionary foreign aid dollars in wealthy countries.
So because the money is finite, he sees it as his duty to ensure every dollar provides the highest impact. He firmly rejects the criticism that he created a false dichotomy, stating simply that when money is finite, you are making choices.
He says it is saintly to say we should have infinite for all three areas: health, adaptation, and mitigation, but that is just not the reality of the current budget environment.
Let's pause to clarify those terms, because they are foundational to his critique. What is the distinction between climate adaptation and climate mitigation?
Okay, so they're completely different strategies. Climate mitigation refers to efforts aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions to slow or stop future warming, think solar power plants, carbon capture technologies, or replacing fossil fuels. It's focused on preventing a future disaster.
Okay, preventing the problem from getting worse.
Exactly. Climate adaptation refers to efforts aimed at dealing with the effects that are already happening.
I see.
Think developing drought-resistant seeds, building seawalls, or developing better water systems for regions facing desertification. It's focused on surviving the current reality.
And Gates is active in both, but he argues that some climate funding is pretty low impact. What kind of programs is he implicitly criticizing here?
He's generally critiquing low-impact mitigation programs that cost a lot in the short term, but won't deliver significant emission reductions for decades, or programs whose impact is geographically limited or duplicated. He stresses that money spent on immediate adaptation, like those drought-resistant seeds for an African farmer, can save current lives and livelihoods.
While some high-cost, speculative mitigation projects may not pay off for 50 years.
Exactly. It's a blunt, purely economic argument. Human well-being now or future risk reduction later.
But politically, saying money for climate mitigation is low impact when there's a recognized climate crisis, even if technically correct, that feels like stepping on a landmine. Did the source material suggest Gates acknowledged the political cost of making such a blunt argument?
He acknowledges the blowback, but maintains his position as necessary. He argues that the climate community needs to adopt a metric of human well-being and rigorously look within its own portfolio to ensure they are picking the highest impact activities.
So he's calling for the same ruthless efficiency he applies to global health.
Precisely. If you have to choose between a project that might reduce carbon by a tiny fraction in 20 years and a project that saves a child from malaria this year, he argues the choice should be clear, especially when 200,000 preventable deaths are projected. This is the ultimate lesson in the scarcity of global philanthropy dollars.
So transitioning from the technical trade-offs to the political ones, let's analyze the current state of Silicon Valley's relationship with Washington, which Gates characterizes as pretty cozy right now.
That's a significant shift from the past, particularly under previous administrations, where tech giants were often treated with suspicion.
Right.
Gates notes that the Trump administration has really opened his arms to the tech sector, with the former president himself encouraging the industry to move at full speed.
What's the underlying philosophy there? Is it pure deregulation?
It seems to be focused on maintaining America's competitive edge against China. Trump's stated focus is on asking, are they slowing you down in Europe? How can I help you go at full speed?
And that's generally seen as highly favorable to rapid, market-driven innovation.
Which is the exact environment AI thrives in.
But innovation brings massive disruption, which takes us back to AI. Gates warns that AI is a disruptor like nothing in our lifetimes, and its potential for job displacement will be significant in the next 2 to 3 years.
Not a long-term distant threat?
No, an immediate political and social challenge facing the next administration.
This is a critical point. Gates warns that AI will hit white-collar service industries and entry-level jobs particularly hard and quickly. Think data entry, basic paralegal work, call centers, and potentially even some teaching functions. The velocity of change is just unprecedented.
And this is where he identifies a major political void, a lack of preparation for this structural economic shock.
He expresses disappointment that neither major political party has a particularly well-developed view on how to mitigate these impending effects.
They're behind on this one.
He notes that politicians are often slow to grasp structural economic shifts, and they are way behind on this one. He suggests policy tools are available, mentioning specifically the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC, as a possible solution.
But there's no serious discussion happening.
A lack of serious cross-party discussion about how to handle the guaranteed job displacement that AI will bring.
We should probably unpack the EITC because for listeners who might not be familiar with it, it's not a typical welfare program. Why is the Earned Income Tax Credit Gates' preferred solution for mitigating job loss?
So the EITC is a refundable tax credit for low to moderate income working individuals and couples. Crucially, it only benefits people who are employed.
It's a wage subsidy.
It's a wage subsidy. So if AI eliminates a significant portion of low-wage jobs, Gates' thinking is that EITC can be expanded to increase the subsidy for the jobs that remain, encouraging people to stay in the workforce and making those lower productivity jobs economically viable through a government subsidy.
So it addresses poverty and job losses without creating a disincentive to work.
That's the idea.
He believes the attempts to regulate technologies that are still taking shape are difficult, but he congratulates the dialogue that is happening, noting the First Lady's conference on the topic.
However, he emphasizes that while accelerating the positive parts of AI, the equity and efficiency we discussed, is clear, mitigating the disruptive negative parts is still a huge unanswered question for politicians.
And it highlights a key difference in his expertise.
It does. In global health, he knows the answers. He knows precisely how the money should be spent. In AI disruption, he admits he doesn't have all the answers, and he is genuinely stunned that there isn't more robust political debate focused on these impending structural changes.
We also get some truly unexpected political insights from Gates here regarding access and communication styles in Washington.
Yes, this was fascinating. Gates reveals a surprising detail about presidential access. He met with former President Trump more times during his first administration than he did with President Biden.
Wow. In an era where Biden is often associated with the technocratic establishment and Trump is viewed as an outsider, that level of access to Trump is remarkable.
He attributes this to President Biden utilizing a delegation style of leadership, relying on cabinet secretaries and staff to convey information.
Right.
In contrast, Gates notes that Clinton, Obama, and Trump were all pretty hands-on, interested in learning new things directly.
So Trump wanted to hear it from him personally.
He did. And in the first Trump administration, Gates felt his input made a difference, particularly in encouraging the retention of key science figures like Francis Collins at the NIH. That personal style of engagement provided an opening for a strategic influence that simply isn't there under the current delegation-heavy approach.
The political dynamics are complex, but what remains consistent is the Foundation's long-term mission. Gates closes the conversation by laying out the ultimate high-stakes goals the Foundation hopes to achieve before its planned sunset in 2045.
It's a 20-year commitment with monumental targets, showing the scale of ambition required for true global equity. First, in child mortality, the goal is to cut childhood deaths from the current level of around 5 million down to below 2.5 million per year.
Which would essentially achieve near global equity, bringing the death rate for children under 5 down to below 2%, roughly matching the rates seen in wealthy countries today.
It's about eliminating that poverty trap mortality margin.
Second, the disease eradication goals are massive. They want to finish polio eradication, as we discussed, eradicate malaria entirely, and reduce HIV and TB deaths by 99%.
Wow.
These are the biggest infectious killers of our time, and the goal is to functionally neutralize them as major threats.
And finally, a focus that has grown in recognition, eliminating malnutrition. Right. Gates notes that malnutrition wasn't initially recognized as such a huge problem 20 years ago, but addressing it is essential to ensure children's brains and bodies develop to their full potential.
Because if a child survives, but their physical and cognitive development is permanently stunted by lack of nutrition, the poverty trap just continues.
Exactly. And he is highly optimistic they will achieve these goals within the next 20 years, largely because of the combination of dedicated resources and the ability to work with smart people and promote innovation, particularly AI, to counter the political funding contractions.
So after laying out these massive optimistic goals, what keeps the world's most successful philanthropist and public health advocate up at night?
Yeah.
It's not the science or the funding amounts. Those he believes are solvable.
His main concern is the current political climate, polarization, in the United States and globally. He worries that this polarization undermines the fundamental cooperation needed both to shape AI beneficially and to achieve global health targets.
So when political actors are unwilling to listen to each other and budgets become political weapons,
the cooperative work necessary for global problem-solving just grinds to a halt. The political environment is the single biggest threat to human progress.
So we have spent this deep dive unpacking a fundamental, painful tension.
A real tension.
The political budget tightening is directly leading to the projection of more preventable deaths, yet the immense promise of innovations like AI offers a way to drive efficiency and equity, potentially overcoming those budget obstacles.
It truly is a high-stakes race between human progress, fueled by rapid innovation, and political contraction, driven by polarization and short-sighted budgetary choices.
And the source material gave us the perfect example of that difficult choice.
Yeah.
We saw Gates argue that trade-offs are unavoidable when money is finite, especially when choosing between climate adaptation, which saves lives now, and climate mitigation, which protects the future.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought, building on the material we've covered. We've seen the projection for 200,000 more children to die because of funding cuts in 2025.
Right.
When we look at various high-cost climate initiatives and global health priorities that compete for the exact same pool of funds, a pool that represents less than 1% of wealthy nations' budgets.
What metric, immediate human well-being or mitigation of long-term future risk, should definitively guide resource allocation for those critical small budget decisions? Something for you to mull over as you process the insights from this deep dive.
Thank you for listening.
We'll see you next time on What They Really Said.